our speakers was supposed to have been Mark Martins with Department of Energy's OSTI, Office of Science and Technical Information. Unfortunately, it's flu season, and his kids came down with flu, so okay, it was up.
There'll be one day when our grandchildren will tell us, "You remember they used to screw around with those stupid computer systems?"
And wow, that looks horrible all of a sudden. Okay, so as he's not here, he doesn't know how much that message is. Really? Try again. Right. Don't try to fix things because you'll just make them worse. Got it. Third time's a charm, right? Anybody? Big. I don't know about better. Okay. So anyways, Mark Martin was going to present our data site. And he, wow. I can't even read it on the screen, so I doubt anybody else is going to be able to. Anyways, I was going to mention that Department of Energy, OSTI, is one of the 3 U.S. members, besides California Digital Library and Purdue, and that they support the Department of Energy to maintain a vibrant U.S. effort in science and engineering as a something cornerstone of our economic prosperity, and they have a strategic plan. And they have to deal with all of the problems of dealing with global standards and workflows and lots of different people participating, but that each person may have their own local infrastructure and different funding issues. That one's almost legible. So, lots of members, most in Europe, along with the Australian National Data Service, Canadian Institute of Science and Technical. Why does it seem like it's moving word? Oh, so I won't go over the full list. I fixed this slide too. All right, so it's structured with the main foundation. And there are lots of individual data site members, which is composed of multiple institutions, which each have multiple data centers. And that thing you can't read on the right was supposed to be associate stakeholder. And the question was, why to cite data? And obviously it was to help enable reuse and verification of data, allow the impact of data to be tracked, which was mentioned earlier, and creating a scholarly structure that recognizes and rewards data providers. It was also mentioned that sharing your data isn't viewed as highly as writing a bad paper these days. So long as you get cited. So if you write it bad enough stuff, lots of people cite your paper telling how bad it is. That's worth the most well we can figure out. So the goal is to support researchers by helping them find, identify, and cite research data sets with confidence. Support the data centers by providing persistent identifiers for data sets, workflows, and standards for data publication, and support journal publishers by enabling research articles to be linked to the underlying data. And they're primarily mostly working with the folks that are providing data. Don't even try and read it, it's just going to give you a headache. So they can now make DOIs, and I believe it's through the California Digital Library, and I don't remember what all their policies are on what you can do to get access, but I know they have a fee structure if you want to get DOIs through them. And yeah, I can't read that slide either. No, something about open approach and looking into other identifiers also. So far they would have over 1 million registered DOIs. They have published, I believe they're up to version 2.2 of their metadata schema. and you can search on what's been registered with them so far. And for those of you that like OAI PMH for metadata harvesting, you can scrape their data. And I can't read the case study, but I'm sure it was from STI. Yeah, I'm not even going to try. And it looked okay before I decided to put out a keynote and come back in. So they have their recommended citation, which was too small to be able to read anyway, even before I screwed up the slides. And if you're interested in participating, if you check their website, they have a contact list, and their recommendation is find somebody close to you, talk to them, and they can help you out. And we would take questions. I think that was supposed to be questions and answers, but I'm not Mark, so no. And because I knew I was going to have to stall for slides, because I knew that I had lost one person, I won't bother with the introducing my poster. So at the BRDI Birdie, the Birdie meeting right before the data site meeting last summer, well, August is still summer. Okay, there was a meeting to discuss attribution and citation, and we had a breakout session. I was in the technical panel, trying to look at the issues regarding attribution and citation of data. So the current practice right now is, well, it depends on the field. In solar physics, you just acknowledge the mission or instrument. Normally you used whatever structured text they give to you, and then hopefully they can find your paper and continue their funding. Sometimes you cite the PI's paper that describes how the instrument was constructed. Sometimes you cite a paper describing the first release of the data. Sometimes you cite something as the data, and they all have problems. So, shrinking again. Anyways, so for acknowledgement, you can't use any of the current bibliographic reference systems to try and get metrics out of it. It also doesn't tell you if there are multiple package forms or multiple process forms of the data, which one you actually used, if it's stored in multiple locations, which mirror you use, because sometimes they'll have disk corruption on one, and we need to track who may have downloaded that data. If there's multiple calibrated states because they've discovered something was wrong with the software or the instrument. It doesn't tell you what version that they used. You may have a downloaded date, but the mirrors don't always stay synced with each other, so that's not necessarily useful. And it doesn't tell you where to actually go to get the data. It's just assumed that in your field you know where it is. If you cite the instrument paper, you have a lot of the same issues of which version was it. You also can't distinguish between citing the data or citing something else in the paper. Were you actually more interested in the telescope that was built or the data that came out of the telescope? If you cite the data paper, the problem is that they're fixed in time. It's published as with any other article. What was true for version 1 of the release of the data may not be true anymore. It could have moved archives. They may have even purged the data for some reason. So then you get the problems of trying to actually cite the data. A lot of it, at least in my field, is not formally published. It's just dumped up on an FTP server somewhere, and people are free to get it. And it has no official title. The author is whatever you feel like assigning to it. It could be the PI, it could be the instrument, it could be the funder. Who knows? Some groups, they need to cite lots of different studies. They aggregated studies of how many birds were in an area across 100 different locations, and there's limits in papers on, depending on journal, how many items you're actually allowed to cite. Or it may have been a multi-year study, and they looked at a 10-minute window of it. So there's both the need for citing a large, many items, or the equivalent of a page number. So anyways, at the Birdie meeting, there were breakout sessions to discuss technical issues, scientific issues, institutional, financial, legal, and socio-cultural issues. Tried to make a list of who the main actors and roles were, and then another one on just what additional information was needed to be collected so that way we could proceed. And in the technical group, we looked it over, and most of the items, actually, the issues came back to identity. How do I know what to call the data that I'm trying to cite? If it is just a bunch of stuff that's thrown up on an FTP server, how do I define what the boundaries are? How I think of the boundaries of the data may be different than anybody else in the field. And a lot of it comes down to knowing the real specifics of the instrument. And then how do you differentiate between similar data, whether it's different editions, whether it's different processed forms that aren't, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, where it's you use the raw data to derive many different products that may be similar. And I know there were more issues, but I don't have those notes with me, and I was doing this on the plane last night. So our issue came down to, we need some formal record for the data. Give it a title, say who you want the author to be, so it's not the person who's trying to cite it down the road just randomly guessing. And we need something that will persist past the lifetime of the data. So that way, if you're reading a 20-year-old paper, you can still find out at least some information about what that data was, even if it doesn't exist anymore. And hopefully, if it was replaced by something, pointer to where it now is. So our proposal was to come up with these, what we called landing pages, that serve as the publishing record for the data set. You can use it as we want you to use it as the endpoint for the citation. It describes enough about the data so that way it can be cited in whatever format that journal requires. It can provide links to the data if it still exists. Provides enough context so the data can be used, even if it's just linking to the documentation and software and whatever. And it persists, but it can still be updated. So as we learn more, if you want to reference that, hey, look, there was this paper, you can list all the papers that have been done with the data, or whatever. And then a second form, which we've referred to as the citation page, which was attached as a supplement to the journal article, where you could describe, if you had 100 different sets, list them all there and just have one citation. If you had to do some additional processing of the data, or if you use specific software that you want to acknowledge, you can put it into there. But we still have challenges. First, we're going to have to create all the records, and we all know how easy it is to generate metadata, especially for projects that have been around for 30-some years, and all we know is what's on an FTP server. Minting the DOIs, but hopefully we can work with DataCite for that one. And then there's the making sure that everything gets maintained and preserved, and then actually getting the authors to use them. And in my field, I'm trying to work with our journal editors to try and get this, if not required, highly suggested. And that was all I had.